Welcome to the Industry Insider, brought to you by PromoCorner. Each week, promotional product professionals Meg Erber, Jeff Franklin, and Stephen McFadden, along with special guests, will discuss industry news, trends, and events with a focus on educating the promotional products industry. The Industry Insider, the nerdy news you need to know.
Welcome back to yet another episode of the Industry Insider, your promotional products podcast where you can get all the nerdy news you need to know about. My name is Jeff Franklin, National Accounts Manager with Headwear USA. I'm joined today by three other lovely folks, but of course, before we get to them, we got to tell you about our fine sponsors for today. Greater Pacific is a direct manufacturer of custom OEM products selling to the promotional products industry with 27 plus years experience, specializing in over 10 product categories. They can source and deliver most any product for you. Greater Pacific is full service sourcing, product, and managing every aspect of production with staff on the ground in Asia and utilizing their time-tested 20-step project management protocol. No need to worry about control or quality control, product safety, CPSIA compliance, or the hundreds of details related to custom manufacturing. Greater Pacific oversees every aspect for you. Their global logistics team is in-house, customs brokering, ensure timely, seamless delivery. This is how you provide the ultimate manufacturing experience. And they're backed by they back this claim with a 30-day production guarantee on all orders. So head over to greaterpacific.com to learn more. Why don't we say hey to Meg Erber. Meg, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. I'm a little bare on the walls and my racks today. I've been on the road every day this week, so it's just easier to just keep everything in my truck versus bring it in to Denver.
Yeah, it looks like you've actually cleaned up the joint a little bit.
Well, it is clean, except for like those boxes or whatever. But
very cool.
You know, how are you, Jeff?
You know, I'm good. You know, road warrior this week and next week, and doing the whole thing. So it's regional trade show time. You know, I'm sure that you guys are experiencing the same thing. Stephen, how are you doing?
Doing great. I actually just got back from traveling as well. Had a client conference this past weekend. They decided it would be great to have it on a weekend. So there's that. But it was good. I'm living the supplier life for the first few months because I have it's like 5 trips in the first 3 months. So I'm like, yeah, I get it. So
only 5 in 3 months?
I mean, they're really long. Does that make any difference?
How long is long?
Well, this one was 3. The Vegas one, which counts because we were all there. I was there for 6 days. Next one is 5 days.
Oh, that is rough.
Those ones are long. I'd prefer to them to be like 48 hours, but
yeah,
in and then out the next day. But these are like longer conferences, which I'm not thrilled about, but I am thrilled to see all the people, which has been fantastic. So
very cool.
Even with all of our travel, it's nothing compared to what Michelle's been doing. I mean, she's literally been in different countries nonstop. So I'll let her tell us about that, but she's all over the place.
That's awesome. Yeah. Can't wait to hear.
It's been great. Hi guys. Thank you for having me. I'm Michele Bell and I'm the Vice President of Editorial and Education and Special Events at ASI. And as Megan said, I think I did the math. It was like 3 shows, 5 countries, 14 flights, 3.5 weeks. So much like you guys, you just kind of have to power through it, right? You just do it.
It's exhausting. It's like, because the last 3 years, there wasn't a lot of travel. I wasn't really on the road as much either. And then it's just, I feel like I know I'm booked every single month except for March with a big trip. So it's a lot. It's a lot.
I'm with Stephen. It's nice to see people again and to see everybody kind of coming back in big throngs. You know, the one show I went to, Megan, I told you about, PSI in Dusseldorf, which was 2 weeks ago. They didn't do a show last year. So they literally had not done a show since 2020, which was a mistake for sure on their part. They should have come back last year. But it was fantastic to see so many people in the European promo market come back.
Yeah, I'll say, I think it's trending. Sorry, real quick. Just this year alone, I think the trade shows, all of them have been like, I think the best pre-pandemic, like best. Sorry, that's all I want to say.
Oh, good. So, Michele, for those of us that don't know who you are, it is customary for us to give our special guest a good 3 to 4 minutes to introduce yourself, maybe how you got started in the commercial products industry, and what you've been up to since, and then we'll sort of take it away into the topic for today.
Sure. Well, thank you for that, Jeff. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
So I've been at ASI. It will be 26 years this April. And I was actually headhunted. I was living at the Jersey Shore at the beach, freelancing as a freelance writer, just hanging out and, partying. And I was headhunted by Tim Andrews' predecessor, the CEO at the time, by this place called the Advertising Specialty Institute, which, of course, what is that? What is that? It sounds like rehab. Like, what does that even mean? An institute. Who wants to go work there? And I certainly didn't know what promotional products were. So, but I was intrigued. It was a position to be a senior editor of the editorial team. So I went, and here I am 26 years later, and have loved pretty much every minute of it.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Well, we've talked about the extensive, experience that you have, obviously, with everything that you've done and all the travel. Obviously, we just talked about. So the topic for today, we want to talk about the European promo market and how they're sparking creativity, and then we also want to talk about the Chinese worker shortage as well. So, I don't know, Meg, did you have any specific questions to sort of kick off the conversation?
Well, I mean, when Michelle and I were talking. She had actually, she was, I don't even know where to start on this. It was really about the European promo market and the creativity. And I know they're like steps ahead of us when it comes to sustainability. And you had sent me this picture, how this one company, an exhibitor, had brought a reclaimed tree in and used that to kind of lean on the message that their company is sustainable. So tell us a little bit about that, what you're seeing over there, some of the trends, and what they're bringing to market.
Yeah, of course. So the PSI show in Dusseldorf really for many years was the largest promo show in Europe. And in its heyday, it was 9 halls and about, if you can imagine, 15 to 1,600 exhibitors. So huge. And, it's diminished and gotten smaller over the years. This year it had about 500 exhibitors. Again, I think, they lost a little bit missing a year from the show, but they had 11,000 attendees. So bigger than Vegas even. So it pulls mainly from Germany, obviously, because it's sitting in Dusseldorf. Just to give you guys a little bit of background, Germany is the largest market for promo in Europe, and they're not great with data over there, market data in Europe, because it's not it's not like the United States, which is just one country, right? It's a whole bunch of little countries, and a lot of them don't do the market data. So our best guess for Germany is it's about a $2 billion euro industry, which puts it at about 2.1 US dollars billion, right? The next biggest market is the UK. So that's the show I was at last week, Merchandise World in the UK. So the UK and Ireland, they actually do have really good data in the UK, courtesy of Sourcing City. So they do a lot of data collection there. So they're about 1.13 billion, I would say, British pounds, which puts it at about 1.4 billion US. So much smaller than our markets, obviously, but still fairly robust. So they're the 2 largest. And then after that, you get France and Italy and Spain and all of that good stuff. So the show at PSI, while much smaller from an exhibitor standpoint, Megan, you asked specifically about product design and the way they merchandise product. I've been going to that show for 20 years. Honestly, their booths are bigger there, so they have more space to work with. But the way they present their product, it's very retail inspired, and their product design. There's certain areas where Europe is just, they're a little bit ahead of us as far as, their products, I would say, they're elegant, they're retail, like they're high end, and especially now where people are gravitating away from the cheaper items, it just really resonates with people when they see it. There were a handful of North American people. The downside of PSI is that typically it overlaps with Vegas. So very few people from the North American market can go. This year, Dana Zezo and the CFO of American Solutions for Business were there for the first time. Carlene Gray from Stalls was there.
You're muted, Meg.
You're muted, Meg.
Never mind.
Okay. And 2 Canadian distributors were there. So none of them had been to the show before. And just to watch the expressions on their faces when they saw, the booths, the way the products are merchandised in the booth, so creative. The way that when you go into a booth, so Stephen, if you were going into Jeff's booth, you're going in for an hour. You're sitting, Jeff's giving you a coffee, something to eat, some wine, some Prosecco.
That's right, Jeff.
And you're in that booth for an hour, and it's much more consultative. It's much more talking about specific plans in depth. So it was fascinating to watch it from the perspective of, Dana and Carlene and Colin from McCabe Promo in Canada, you know, and they were just, I mean, they loved it, honestly, and saw immediately the difference between North American shows and European shows. I would say, look, they're not great at everything. We're better at many things. We're way better at data collection, way better at, I would say, production and imprinting methods. Certainly, our turnaround time is better in the U.S. So these are all things that the Europeans look to us for, as far as, you know, what they can learn from us. While I was there is when the announcement came out about Halo being $1 billion distributor. And they just can't grasp the scale of that, because our industry is so much bigger than theirs. So they were.
Can I ask you a question about that real quick? Because
Yeah.
I don't want to lose my train of thought here. You mentioned some of the data between the European markets, the UK, and then Germany, and then you mentioned the size of the show being attendee wise more than Vegas almost.
Yep.
So is it that much more saturated, or is it? You know, because that many people, same amount of attendees, but a market that's 125th. You know, it seems like that would be a very saturated market. But I hear that there's so much opportunity there as well. So
there's huge opportunity, Stephen. You're right about that. And I would say two things. Number one, so I asked Dana Zezzo, I said, you know, I love that you're here, but I'm curious why you're here. You know, you've never been. And he said, look, you know, it's being driven by my reps now have global clients, because it's so much easier now to have global clients because of the way we all communicate. And he goes, I have to be able to support them and tell them who the big and reputable suppliers are in Europe. And I don't know that until I'm physically here. The other thing, you know, I said about their data, with the exception of the UK, because sourcing city, you know, the UK is a little different because of Brexit. It doesn't operate under the same rules and regulations as the rest of Europe. They have very strict rules for data collection. So they're simply not allowed in many cases to survey the way we do in the US. You know, they're not allowed to ask certain questions. They're not allowed to randomly contact clients, you know, so they're much more hamstrung than we are. So, you know, you try to do the best guesstimates that you can, and go from there. But I would say that because PSI next year does not overlap with PPAI, which is a rarity, I would encourage people to go and see what it's like. And, you know, the same with the Merchandise World Show, much smaller for the UK market. However, the UK market is much easier for North American people to get into because you don't have the language barrier, you know. And
Michelle,
yeah.
Would ASI like to sponsor the Industry Insider going to Dusseldorf for PSI?
If I can live with you.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this, because as you were talking, and I'm thinking my brain is running 100 miles an hour. I'm
mine
like,
too.
okay,
I know.
I want to go to one of these shows. I want to know more about this, but I also have to think practically. If I were to go to a show like that, and knowing that I may not have a global market, but if I went with the mindset of, let me see how it can be done, right? Like you said, the innovation and some of the sustainability and stuff. Is there a way to apply that back here, or even use some of those suppliers here? Is there any overlap, or would it just be me having to source all of those amazing ideas to bring them in? Does that make sense?
It does. You'd have to source a lot. The good news, Stephen, again, since I've been going to that show for 20 years, it used to be incredibly difficult to try to source product between North America and Europe. It's not anymore. It's much, much easier. And, you know, let me just say this, as far as sustainability goes, and I told Megan this, you know, I was seeing sustainable items 15 years ago there, and I would roll my eyes in the back of my head going like, who in the hell in the US is ever going to use a pen made out of coffee grounds? But that's how far ahead they were of us. Now we have caught up significantly, but the amount of vendors there that do incredibly innovative and new things with sustainability, for that alone, I would say it's an interesting thing to see and to go. The other thing is product design. I see product design, color, finishes, textures there that I will see in the US market in a few months. It used to be a much longer lead time. It used to take the US about a year to kind of absorb those trends. We're much better now, but I'll see things there from a product design standpoint first before I see them anywhere else.
It's interesting you mentioned that. I used to have customers out in Los Angeles area, and me being on the East Coast. And when I would go and visit them, I would go to certain shops and streets and look at things. And then I would come back and tell my East Coast people, I'm like, 3 to 6 months, you'll be seeing these patterns and designs. Now, obviously the the world has gotten smaller and
Sure.
social media has made it where things are pretty much instant across the country, but there was still that gap. It's, you know, you listen to the top 100 songs in LA and you'd come back home and I'd be like, oh, I heard this 3 months ago. It was the number one
Right.
song already. So, you know,
Yeah.
you wonder is like, is this a way to kind of get a glimpse into the future of promo?
For
With a show
sure.
like this. Yeah.
And I would say, look, the people, and you don't have to be one of the biggest companies, like at the Merchandise World show in the UK last week, you know, yes, Craig Nadell was there because Nadell has a London office. But, you know, so were, you know, Kenny Ved was there from Gold Star. Gold Star was exhibiting. Storm Tech from Canada was exhibiting because they see the value of tapping into global markets. As much as they have to offer us, we as Americans, I mean, they just are fascinated by our market and, you know, the size of it, what we can do, how fast we are, our technology. That is one area where honestly, we have them beat hands down. We have so much better technology here as far as being industry specific.
That's really
So,
interesting.
Stephen, I kind of like the line of questioning in regards to like, you know, the attendees and the size difference from our show versus theirs. So, like, in regards to the booths, you said, you know, the booths there are bigger, and, you know, so I mean, is the booth space less expensive then to exhibit as well? Because I mean, you're talking about, like you said, a tenth of the size of our shows or our industry, but bigger booths.
Well, 120. Yeah. Yeah,
Huge,
really. It's
huge booth. So again, they are not hamstrung by some things that, you know, raise your hand if this sounds familiar.
unions.
So they can serve alcohol in the booth. At the Merchandise World show, they did free breakfast and free lunch every day. So the costs of putting on events there are much more friendly to the person hosting the event. So you don't have things like Teamsters in Chicago, for example, or a place like that, where you're being hit with like a corkage fee to open a bottle in a booth and, you know, the size of the booth. So they're much, much bigger, but the costs are not as exorbitant as they are in North America for sure. So right now, for example, there's a show going on and it's a growing show and it's one I'm watching. I'll probably go next year. It's called CTCO and it's in Lyon, France. And it draws from a completely different market than PSI does. For PSI, you're getting, you know, obviously the Germans, you know, and that side of Europe. This show is pulling from Southern Europe. So you're getting the French, the Italians, the Spanish. The caveat is that at the Dusseldorf show in PSI, most people speak English. The CTO show, which I went to once, let me just tell you, my high school French got a workout because very few of them speak English. So you got it. There's a little bit of heavy lifting involved. But as far as, again, design, product, display, the way they merchandise things, it's just fantastic. And it's just a really good experience to go to. I always recommend that people from the US who can go.
So what did you see were the top products or trends that are over there that may not be over here? Is there anything that we're missing that they were like just killing it with over there?
You know, I would say the breadth of the sustainability items. That was really the thing. Like every single booth had sustainability options. There were suppliers that are 100% sustainable. There was a new supplier that I saw in Merchandise World that, you know, every single product in their 500-page recycled catalog was sustainable, and you could track the CO2 output and, you know, everything. They're so good at documenting things like that. I found an electronics company called Baby USB at Merchandise World, and they had like this little flat recycled paper solar powered calculator that I just thought was cute, but that was the whole booth. I mean, things like that, just amazing.
That's mind blowing. That really is. And then I guess, you know, talking about all these technology products would, I guess, segue into the next topic, unless there's anything else, but labor shortages. I mean, this isn't something that's going away. And now we're seeing that there's even a smaller pool to pull laborers from, I guess. Let's talk about that a little bit.
So I think, you know, you guys certainly would know this too, but to me, the area that we're going to see that hit us most is China. And, you know, oh boy, do I love being on my soapbox about how this industry is so dependent on China. I mean, Megan, if I told you that I was a distributor and 95% of my business came from one client or one market, you would think I was a crazy person. You know what I mean? Like, it's a little insane to me, although I understand it because of the infrastructure in China. But due to, political things happening over there, look, there's two reasons they are suffering significant labor shortages. For years, since 1980, they've had a one-child policy in China. Now, I'm not a population expert, but that's going to come back and bite you in the ass in some way, okay? And you tack on to that for many, many years, they had a propensity to keep, they did. I've been going to China for 17 years. They would, put little baby girls up for adoption. So you've got a male dominated population that's shrinking. And then, much like here in North America, you've got young people who don't want to do jobs like their parents, and they don't want to work in factories, that are hot for 18 hours a day. So you've got a young population in China that's shrinking. They don't want to work in the factories. We're going to see that in this industry because, as I said to you, Meg, if a Walmart and a PCNA or a HIT goes into a factory and they've got orders, who do you think the order, if they have a reduced production cycle, is going to fulfill first? Let me end the suspense. It's not PCNA or CJ. You know what I'm saying? So that's going to cycle its way down to our industry. Here's what I think is smart. Many suppliers, CJ being one of them actually, are looking to places like Vietnam, Bangladesh, Turkey for textiles, and Mexico. I give HPG all the credit in the world because buying Evans gave them Mexico because Evans they have a facility in Mexico. So that was very smart of them. CJ, as he told me recently, has taken out a bunch of his production from China and is moving it to Vietnam. Also very smart. They, for the first time, now have their own show. So that's in April, actually. So Vietnam has a show in Ho Chi Minh. I won't go to that this year, but maybe I would go next year just to see what it's like. But if you were to ask me, Meg, one place that people can look to Vietnam.
Vietnam.
Their infrastructure is being built up fast, and they don't have the same labor and political issues that China does.
That's really good to know because it's something that's not common knowledge to someone like me, Stephen. I know, Jeff, you are kind of deal with a lot of production. You might know more than we do, but that's really good, really, really good to know. I mean, I don't even get to deal with that aspect of it, but just having that knowledge. I know we have a brand, Toltex, that is in Mexico. And just because the U.S., you might want to say that right, USMC, it took over the North American leader. I don't know leadership in the North American treaty. I should know this. I'm so sorry.
That's
yeah.
okay.
Yes.
AFTA.
We can get the goods back.
Brexit.
A lot. Yeah. Quicker too. But no, and I think just having you on the show, you're such a wealth of information. And I think we're hearing a lot about CJ and everything that they're doing lately. It's the second podcast in a row his name's popped up. So we have to drag him on here.
So go ahead, Michelle.
No, I was going to say, look, he is arguably, when we're both in China, and I haven't been there since before COVID, but I would always laugh, like all of the vendors know him by name. I was like, you're like Madonna. Like they don't even know they're like CJ. They just know him. So, his business is so large in China, but I give him all the credit in the world for seeing that and pulling a significant amount out of there, which is wise.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if you have any info or knowledge about any of this, but I'll shoot from the hip. Obviously there's been a lot of things in China that we're seeing in regards to the chip manufacturing, and there was the iPhone facilities, and there is all sorts of restrictions with the way they're handling some of the virus stuff over there. And I know there's got to be a trickle down, especially with the chips. So any news to share on that, or any developments that we should be aware of?
I would say not the chips specifically, Stephen, but what I would say is, look, again, I've been in those factories. Jeff, I don't know if you've ever been overseas to see those factories, but they're not on their best day. They're not like the most well-ventilated, healthiest places to be. So, with the lockdowns, the restrictions, the quarantines, their supply chain was constricted so significantly. Yes, it's starting to come back, but if you factor in then the young workforce that doesn't want to go back, they're not good, much like in the US where people aren't going back to the jobs they had, same thing. Because 95% of our imported products come from China, you do the math, that invariably is going to hit us. And especially in areas like drinkware, electronics. So I know I kind of
No,
circled
it
around.
is helpful. I think with the way social is now, you get all these videos a lot more up close and personal than we used to. And when you see videos like the whole apartment places with all the stuff being thrown out and just people leaving and running, it's like,
Yeah.
wow. I mean,
What's going on, right?
It's a lot. It's a lot to consume, and it's hard to know like really what's going on so far, on the other side of the world, right? So, and as you mentioned, we're greatly impacted by all of it. So, just trying to have a better pulse on it. But maybe we are, maybe we aren't. And it just depends on the industry and the market. But obviously, there's going to be some sort of effect. As we learned anything over the past few years, one small ripple affects a big chain of the supply chain. So,
listen, of course. And that's why I think it's so important, Stephen. Like, as much as I love going to the European shows, and I loved Hong Kong, which is a very different place now, but I never loved going to China for many reasons. It's a laborious, difficult trip, and being in those factories is not a pleasant experience in many ways. The people are lovely, but it's challenging. But I just think it's so important to go. I mean, just to kind of circle back to your overarching topic here, it's so important to visit overseas events and to go to suppliers there. And I mean, even Canada, I always make a point to go to the Canadian show because, you just get to see a different way of doing business from the way we do here. And you just learn so much.
So as someone who has my mind set on going to one of these shows now in the future, where would you start? Would it be the PSI show?
I would definitely say PSI, especially, Stephen, because it does not overlap next year from PPAI. So next year it is from January 9th to the 11th.
Okay.
And I'm happy to, I helped Dana, and I felt like when I was walking the show, I had these 6 little ducklings walking behind me because they had never done this show before. So I'm happy to kind of, be a tour guide and tell you where to stay and where to go and all that good stuff. But it's a very easy show to go to. Again, most people speak English. They're thrilled. They just love Americans there. Love, love, love. And they just want to know everything about our industry and how do we get so big? And oh my God, you have $2 billion distributors now. Like, they're just enamored by what we do.
Yeah. Wait till you tell them about the buying groups and what those add up to as well. Their heads will roll.
Or wait till you tell them that you were on the podcast with the Industry Insider crew.
Have you ever had a celebrity come with you, Michelle?
I mean, that's what I'm saying. I think ASI should sponsor our trip over there next year,
Like, these guys are the top podcast of that huge industry. These are them.
Swarmed by the Germans.
And Stephen, to talk to your point with the chips, I have had my truck for almost a year. It'll be a year in March. I just had the front heated seats chips installed. That's not the steering wheel. That's not the air conditioning. And that's not the back seat. And I'm sorry that I'm acting all bougie, but once you have heated seats and the hearing steering wheel in this cold ass territory, you can't go back. You can't. It's really hard for me to get in my nice car.
Champagne problems,
Let me just tell you.
Champagne problems, Meg.
Champagne problems. But yeah, the chip thing. So it's been a year and I still don't even have. So I don't know when I'm going to even get them. So there's big delays there.
So Michelle, what do you see is for a lot of the suppliers that are pulling out of China and going to other manufacturing locations? What are you seeing as the biggest hurdles for those companies? Because obviously, I mean, China is just such a beast with the infrastructure and the skilled labor.
It is, and that's what it's going to be, Jeff. Look, Vietnam is making huge strides very quickly with its infrastructure, but it still does not compare to China. So I think it's important to look at other areas. So when I was at the PSI show, they kind of bucket their booths by themes too. And I was like, where am I? All of a sudden, there were all of these exhibitors from Turkey. And I was like, what am I seeing here? And it was was bags and textiles. So I hadn't realized, and I did a little research into it, that Turkey has become an emerging market for material for textiles and bags, which I thought was fascinating. So, if you dig into it a little bit, you can find pockets around the globe where they're doing really, and Bangladesh is another one, by the way, that I'm hearing a lot of people are going because they're starting to build up quickly. Look, a lot of money is pouring into these places because they know that people need another option from China. So you've got a lot of investment from the governments and from people pouring into these countries to build up the infrastructure.
Sure.
Good to know.
All right. Any other questions, Meg or Steven?
I don't. Well, Michelle, who do you have for the Super Bowl? Eagles or Chiefs?
Well, let me say this. I love that little Patrick Mahomes. I just think he's adorable, but I think that they would roast me on a spit if I said anything other than the Eagles.
I mean, we have
I'll
Jalen
take
Hurts.
hot
He's
heat,
also
man.
adorable.
It's Kansas City. The AFC is definitely beating the NFC. It's not happening. It didn't matter if
No.
the Bengals won that game. The Bengals would have beat the Eagles. Come on.
Please.
You want to take a bet, Mr. Franklin?
I think the
I think we need
Bengals
to.
would have won, but I
A
think
model's closet agrees.
Chiefs are super banged up.
They are super banged up.
It's like really bad. Like they're probably at their weakest all season going into the Super Bowl, and that's a scary time to be that weak.
Yeah.
I would say Philly if I had to guess.
We have the best fans.
I honestly,
Okay.
I fear for my
No.
city for the next 2 weeks. I got people hanging off streetlights. I've got
I know.
people are crazy.
They said they greased the streetlights. I don't think that even mattered.
So
So
if
I
everybody's
will-
in Philly say they're greasing the poles, it doesn't mean what you think it means. It means they're greasing the street poles so people can't climb up and swing from them, which they do
Yes.
anyway.
Yes.
The shameless plug. That is where I will be next week, and
We're gonna be
yeah,
live from the Super Bowl.
that's right. And Mr. Hunt
Wow.
is always in attendance at our events, so I've met him a few times. Him and his wife. So I can't really say Philly. I
Fun.
probably have to say Kansas City if he hears this. But no. But Philly's probably gonna win that game. So.
Awesome.
Thanks
Is
for
Jeff
having
frozen?
us, guys.
I think Jeff's frozen.
If he is, this podcast, thank you all for joining, was brought to you by Greater Pacific.
Do we have the ad read?
That's what I'm doing off the top of my head. Greater
All right.
Pacific. Great options for sourcing product, and they have all of your regulations figured out so you don't have to worry about it. So make sure you check out Greater Pacific. Thank you guys all
And tune in next week
for attending. And we'll see you next week. And I will monologue, I suppose. All right, everybody, take care.